Okay, so we want to talk about ways to mitigate some of the future impacts of climate change. But as we know, the damage caused by more extreme weather is already being felt today. There is perhaps no better example than the destruction brought by Superstorm Sandy, certainly here throughout the Northeast coast. A little less than a year ago, it made landfall October 29th, so the year anniversary is coming up. Our next panel is going to look at how we can become more resilient to these extreme weather impacts and some of the nation's foremost business and government leaders on the issue. So what I'm going to do now is introduce Amy Davidson, who is the Executive Director of the Climate Group North America, and she is going to take it from here. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Stephanie. It is a little loud in here. I think I saw Brigadier Cheney leave, but maybe he would be able to quiet people down a little bit better. At the Climate Group, we work with our members and partners to build a successful, high-opportunity, low-carbon economy that spurs growth, creates jobs, and enhances energy security. Building this low-carbon future will mean an improved quality of life for communities here in the U.S. and around the world. It will also mean that the crippling effects of climate change, such as extreme weather, will have been averted. Still, as we strive to build this... Can you guys try to keep that quiet? Still, as we strive to build this low-carbon world, climate change is happening now, today, and it affects us all. Last year was particularly bad for extreme weather in the U.S. It was the hottest year on record for the continental U.S. by large. There were 11 major climate disasters causing over $110 billion in damages and 377 deaths, making it the second costliest year on record. The drought still affects over 60% of the country, and it's expanding in the Corn Belt. And this is part of a broader trend in which most of the hottest and costliest years in U.S. history have occurred within the past decade. For those of us who live in the tri-state area, these statistics were made glaringly evident last year when we saw the homes of friends and families destroyed by Superstorm Sandy. And we witnessed just how difficult it is for many to recover from such an event. The good news, which we've learned from our partners like Swiss Re, New York City, and New York State, is that there are solutions today that can make us more resilient to these climate impacts. That's why we've convened this group of visionary leaders on climate adaptation to explore what we've learned since Hurricane Sandy and how we can build a more resilient society for the future. And with that, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Brian Walsh from Time Magazine. Brian is a senior writer for Time and Time.com based here in New York, where he focuses on environmental issues, general interest, and national stories. He writes the Going Green column for Time and Time.com and contributes to Time.com's environmental issues blog, Ecocentric. Brian has written extensively on this topic and is an expert in his own right, and maybe can quiet the room better than I. Brian?
Thank you very much, Amy. And thank you. Thank you to the Climate Group for putting together the panel on really what's been an uncovered but incredibly important subject when it comes to dealing with climate change. I don't think anyone who did what I did in the immediate aftermath of Sandy and took that long walk home back to, let me go over here. Took that long walk home back through Lower Manhattan when it was cast in complete darkness, and would doubt that climate change and extreme weather can wreak amazing damage on a modern city. So we have a great panel to talk about this, going from right to left. We first have Richard Kauffman, who's the chairman of Energy and Finance for New York State, where he oversees and coordinates energy policy. Prior to that position, he was senior advisor to Secretary Stephen Chu at the U.S. Department of Energy. Then we have Judith Rodin, who is the president of the We have Gary Guzy, who is the deputy director of the White House Council on Environmental Quality. To his left, we have Judith Rodin, who is the president of the Rockefeller Foundation, one of the world's leading philanthropic organizations, and before that, she was president of the University of Pennsylvania. To her left, we have Daniel Zarrilli, who is the director of Resiliency at the Mayor's Office of New York City, where he leads the implementation of Mayor Bloomberg's plan to build a stronger, more resilient city in the wake of Sandy. And lastly, we have Philip K. Ryan, who is the chairman of the board at the Swiss Re America Holdings Corporation, where he focuses on Swiss Re's strategic priorities in the Americas. And before that, he was the chief financial officer of the Power Corporation of Canada. So we're going to have a conversation here for about, I think, 30 minutes. We will then take some questions from the audience. We'll also try to take questions from Twitter as well. So if you have any questions for our panelists and you're tweeting, you can tweet them at the hashtag CWNYC. So I want to start with Hurricane Sandy, which was in so many ways for this region unprecedented and really exposed our extreme vulnerability to the impact of severe weather. So I want to start with Richard. Let me ask, what have we learned from the experience of Hurricane Sandy?
Well, maybe I can pass that on to Dan.
Dan, you want to start?
Thanks, Richard. I guess when it really comes down to Sandy was an incredibly massive event here in New York City. The impacts were large, and we saw them across a wide range of infrastructure. We saw them in our neighborhoods. I think some of the biggest things we learned is how deep and how big our vulnerabilities are even now. And as we begin to think through solutions, Mayor Bloomberg has now in June put out the plan, A Stronger, More Resilient New York, which is our effort and attempt to define the problem and to identify solutions. As we've gone through this process, we've really identified that we have key vulnerabilities now, and those vulnerabilities are only growing in the future. And I think what we've really learned from this is that some things can work in how we respond to climate change and how do we adapt, and some things don't. And our plan with 257 odd initiatives for how we can improve our infrastructure and our neighborhoods really gets into the detailed planning that really only cities can do it in a lot of ways, the detailed planning exercises that we can do to make ourselves stronger.
Judith?
Well, I'll speak from two roles. One, I chaired with Felix Rohatyn the Sandy Recovery Commission for the state of New York, and so had the opportunity to really see the vulnerabilities and our potential responses to them. And of course, the Rockefeller Foundation has been deeply engaged in cities responding to the threat of climate change all around the world and has a number of investments there. I think as we step back and we really think about New York's vulnerabilities, it's very clear that we can't only focus on what we rebuild, we also have to focus on how we rebuild, because that is really the answer to this vulnerability. And so a lot of the recommendations that we made, a lot of the recommendations that we see in the mayor's report really have to do with the what and the how together. We've got to build more resilient systems, whether it's our infrastructure, our energy, our transportation infrastructure, also our financing mechanisms, which Richard will talk about, but all of the things together that make us more resilient, meaning systems that are able to fail more safely by islanding and de-networking. We're so tightly interlinked. Think about our energy system so that one piece takes the whole system down. So we rebuild with smart grid technology that enables that kind of delinking to occur. We build with more redundancy. So one of the things that our commission recommended was that New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut build some redundant supplies of essential materials for infrastructure. We don't know when the next event is going to occur or where it's going to be, but we can't wait 5 weeks for a critical piece to be manufactured in order for a system to come back. We've got to build better feedback loops and information systems. I looked at a lot of data that were available both to the city and the state, but the mechanisms for utilizing some of those data in real time with real feedback that would allow you to imagine a response to rebound more quickly simply were not there. So these are some of the vulnerabilities. The framework around resilient rebuilding is a critical one as we attack those vulnerabilities, not knowing where the next punch is going to come from. Remember, we put generators in the basement because the last attacks were the World Trade Center, and we thought we were vulnerable on the roof. So we just don't know. Resilience is about recognizing that fact and building in a way that really allows you to rebound, not from the last event, but anticipating the next one.
So I'd just like to add to what Judith just said, because I think that one of the things that we need to learn is that there's a difference between hardening. When we talk about resiliency, we talk about hardening or we talk about flexibility. And it's very important to make the distinction. So obviously there are some things that need to be hardened, but the thing that we've learned is that we need to build, we simply cannot rebuild what we've had. And if business as usual will not only not solve the problem that we have, and the problem that will not solve the impending problems, but it will cost us way too much money. So we'll wind up spending too much money for something that does not achieve what we want. And so the other thing I think that we've learned is we've got to get on with it, because every day that goes by, ratepayers spend money on our system, and money gets invested, and we have tremendous infrastructure, electricity infrastructure that is constantly being rebuilt in the state, and we need to figure out how we are going to build it back better.
Gary, you can talk about the national perspective here.
Yeah. And I just want to commend the incredible work that was done at the local, state, and philanthropic level and among businesses in considering the effects of Sandy in a really fundamental way and in taking so many steps to rebuild. You know, I think one of the striking things about it was just the idea of predictability. We sort of bring certain assumptions to what will happen next. And I think one lesson from Sandy, one lesson we see nationally when we look at the extent of drought or the extent of wildfire, is that in scenarios of climate change, what we think might be predictable, we actually aren't predicting sufficiently, and we can't rely purely upon past circumstances, but really have to apply the best, the most robust, the most comprehensive scientific data to help us with those kinds of predictions. And that's a real challenge for all of us. I think another thing that really was striking about Sandy was the sort of domains in which we saw effects. We saw effects on communities and how they operated. We saw effects on the economy as a whole. We saw effects on individual sectoral infrastructure. We saw effects on natural resources, which were already stressed. And so it's really thinking about interrelationships of systems, as Judith said. It's thinking about, you know, that you might have not be able to get a fuel supply for the city because the power sector is affected. Those interrelationships, which are very difficult to predict, are absolutely critical. And let me just make one last point, which is I think we found that more so than anyone could have predicted, the importance of partnerships. And those were partnerships among levels of government, state, local, federal, delivering response, delivering first response, delivering aid, doing it in a smart and considered way, bringing money to bear on the problem, bringing resources to bear on the problem, but also partnerships between the public sector and the private sector, absolutely critical pieces of the puzzle.
And Philip, this was a huge hit for the insurance industry, obviously, and what Gary was talking about in terms of the challenge of predicting the future, knowing it's not going to resemble the past. So how did your industry respond, or what kind of lessons have they taken from Hurricane Sandy?
Well, interestingly enough, Sandy was not statistically a surprise to us. It was well within the band of expected outcomes and probability. As a matter of fact, when you look at the storm, technically, the fact that the wind levels were lower than expected, rain levels were lower, if you view that differently, Sandy could have been substantially worse. You know, the flood surge was evident because of a series of meteorological events that came together. So when the insurance industry looks at it, it was well within the band of outcomes, and you can see that the insurance industry handled Sandy extremely well. The 40% payout of claims went through without any of the players showing really any stress at all. I think when we look forward from the insurance industry standpoint, where we really can make a difference is the industry has the ability to assess and price risk. We were involved in the New York City study and also the New York State study, and the industry can help municipalities figure out where the risk is, where are the costs, and offer solutions for mitigating the volatility and mitigating that cost.